Amin is an attorney of law and has been practicing for 5 years privately. She's presently employed as a legal officer at the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, for just over a year. Her role is to ensure compliance with the Environmental Protection Act, I think which was passed in 2006 or 1996. 1996, I believe. And to guide and advise legally with regards to environmental concerns and issues. So I invite Amina to come present.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols observed. I would like to establish up front, I am not an expert in this area. Neither am I a specialist or an environmentalist. So I just want to point that out. However, I will give an overview of the environmental and regulatory framework of the EPA. Now, the EPA was established by the enactment of the Environmental Protection Act, Chapter 2005, in 1996. It addresses areas of environmental management and sustainable use of natural resources. The mandate of the EPA Act, or more so the EPA, is to provide for the effective management, conservation, protection, and improvement of the environment, the prevention and control of pollution, and the assessment of the impact of economic development on the environment. There are many functions listed under Part 2, Section 4.1 of the Environmental Protection Act. Some of these functions are to coordinate the environmental management activities of all persons, organizations, and agencies, to establish, monitor, and enforce environmental regulations, to prevent or control environmental pollution, and to ensure that any developmental activity which may cause an adverse effect on the natural environment is assessed before such activity can commence, and that such adverse effect be taken into account in deciding whether or not such activity should be authorized by the EPA. Now, the legislation governing the EPA, as pointed out before, falls under the Environmental Protection Act, Chapter 2005. Now, the Environmental Protection Act creates the basic institutional and regulatory framework within which all activities that may or may not have significant impacts on the human health, natural, social, and cultural environment are governed. Part 2, Section 4.1d of the Act gives the agency the power to establish, monitor, and enforce environmental regulations. As such, since the enactment of the EPA Act, there have been over several subsidiary regulations which falls under that act. The regulations under the Environmental Protection Agency Act are as follows: the Environmental Protection Water Quality Regulations of 2000, the Environmental Protection Hazardous Waste Management Regulations, the Environmental Protection Noise Management Regulations, the Environmental Protection Air Quality Regulation, the Environmental Protection Litter Enforcement Regulations, Environmental Protection Expanded Polystyrene Ban Regulations, which was established in 2015, the Environmental Protection Authorization Regulations of 2000. Now, many persons may ask the question as to whether these regulations are sufficient to deal with the emerging upstream oil and gas sector. This has been a debate by itself. Nevertheless, Section 68(1) of the EPA Act empowers the subject minister to enact regulations to articulate specific areas of environment management as he deems fit. The environmental permit takes precedence over other development consent. Section 14(1) of the EPA Act prohibits other public agencies responsible for issuing development consents in relation to matters where an environmental authorization is needed. For example, Before exploration and development activities can occur, the operator must obtain an environmental authorization before agencies such as GGMC can give development consent. This is just a brief example that the agency has to give first consent before any other sector agency permits any project. Section 14(2) of the EPA Act also states where an environmental authorization is cancelled or suspended, the development consent issued by a public authority shall be suspended until the environmental authorization suspension is revoked or a new environmental authorization is issued. Section 15(1) of the said Act states that every person who fails to carry out an environmental impact assessment or who commences a project without obtaining an environmental permit as required under the Act or regulations shall be guilty of an offense and shall be liable to the penalties prescribed therein. Now, the penalties under the Act are very minimum. It ranges from $75,000 to $300,000. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the requirement for an environmental impact assessment. Now, the Environmental Protection Act, Part 4, Section 11(1) requires that developers of proposed projects listed in the 4th Schedule of the Act or which are deemed by the agency to have potentially significant impacts on the environment must apply to the agency for an environmental permit, and they will be required to conduct an EIA if the agency is of the view that one is deemed. If the proposed project has no significant impact on the environment, an EIA may not be required. What is an environmental impact assessment? An environmental impact assessment is a planning and decision-making tool used by regulatory agencies and developers. It involves baseline data gathering, predicting environmental impacts, providing a mitigation plan for negative impacts, monitoring for environmental indicators. The EIA must contain the following information: a project summary and project description, including physical characteristics of the project, a site design and size of the project, possible effects on the environment, duration of the project, and a non-technical explanation of the said project. Now, this is a brief overview of the stages in the environmental authorization process. During this process, a developer may submit an application to the Environmental Protection Agency for an environmental authorization. The EPA would screen the application, and if it is determined during the screening process whether an EIA is required, then before the EIA can begin, the agency shall, at the developer's cost, publish in at least one daily newspaper a notice of the project and make available to the public a project summary. That is in the event that an EIA is required. Now, when the notice is published, the general public has within 28 days of the notice to make written submissions to the agency, setting out questions and matters or concerns they wish to be considered in the EIA process. After consultation with persons conducting the EIA, which is the consultant for the developer, the terms and conditions and the scope of the EIA are set by the agency. During the course of the EIA, the developer and their consultant shall consult members of the public, interested bodies, and organizations. So this is the part where the developer will have to conduct public scoping meeting with the general public to get their views and concerns. After the EIA study has been completed, and the results submitted to the EPA, the general public will have within 60 days to send any comments or concerns, recommendations to the EPA. Now, whilst the agency would receive comments and recommendations during that 60 days period, those comments also has to be forwarded to the developer so that they can be aware of the public's views and concerns. After the 60 days would have passed, the EPA will review the EIA. Thereafter, they would send it to the Environmental Assessment Board. All comments, again, are sent to the developer. The developer, based on the recommendation of the Environmental Assessment Board, if they approve the EIA process, if it is acceptable, then an environmental permit will be issued or granted to them. And thereafter, the terms and conditions are set accordingly. Now, if an EIA is not required, this is if the project does not have any major significant impacts on the environment, then an EIA will not be required. If an EIA is not required, a notice is published in a daily newspaper, and the general public has within 30 days to either lodge an appeal with the Environmental Assessment Board if they do not agree with the decision of the agency to authorize a project that is not EIA required. If there is no objection or appeal during that 28 days notice, then the relevant documents are reviewed, additional documents may be submitted, and once it is accepted by the agency, the environmental authorization is granted. It is important to note that the fact that the public can lodge an appeal against the issuance of an exception for an EIA indicates that the Environmental Assessment Board provides independent oversight to applications for environmental permit. So this is a separate body from the EPA. What is an environmental permit? An environmental permit is a legal document which gives environmental authorization to conduct various activities which may have an impact on the environment and human health. The permit puts conditions in place to mitigate and minimize damage to the environment and human health. The various types of environmental authorization permitted by the EPA are through an environmental permit, an operations permit, construction permit, or prescribed process permit. Now, in an environmental permit, you would notice there are various terms and conditions under the broad headings which are highlighted. If I had more time, I would have uploaded a precedent of what the environmental permit looks like. But generally, these are some of the broad terms and conditions that are found in an environmental permit. We also have the liabilities provisions in the environmental permit, which basically states that the permit holder shall be liable, strictly liable for any loss or damage to the environment through any act caused intentionally or recklessly through the adverse effect of any discharge or release, or cause or permit the entry of pollution, contamination in any amount, concentration or level in excess of that prescribed by the regulations or stipulated by any environmental authorization which are attributed to the project. The permit holder shall also be guilty of an offense in accordance with section 39(1) and the various subsections that follows, which states respectively, every person who causes material or serious environmental harm by polluting the environment intentionally or recklessly with the knowledge that material and or serious environmental harm will or might result is guilty of an offense and shall be liable to the penalties prescribed therein. And finally, to conclude, the work and role of the Environmental Protection Agency is indeed significant in any country, particularly in Guyana more so since the rapid growth of the emerging oil and gas sector. Though our work may be deemed complex, it is important to have capacity building, coordination, and collaboration with the private and public sectors, NGOs, and sector agencies such as the GFC and the GGMC. It is necessary for the sharing of data, of information, and more so necessary for the accomplishment of the EPA's mandate. I thank you for your attention.
Next presentation will focus on occupation health and safety. Is Nirmala here? Nirmala Parasan? Oh, hi. So Nirmala Parasam is Managing Director of Diverse AHSE Solutions, and she is an occupational health and safety professional for over the past 12 years, actually ranging in a number of industries. She has a master's in occupational safety and health at Loughborough University in the UK and is an independent assessor of Trinidad and Tobago's Energy Chamber's Safe to Work program. She's facilitated, having facilitated, as a principal consultant for the past 6 years, she has been instrumental in implementing successfully audited occupational safety and health management systems in a number of companies. So we're happy to have you here.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction, Madam Moderator. All protocols observed, a pleasant good afternoon to all of you. So it's a pleasure to be given this opportunity to present to you at this inaugural conference. Before I lead into the presentation, I'll just provide a brief introduction into who we are and what we do. Diverse HSE Solutions is a Trinidad incorporated company offering health and safety management system consultancy services, HSE training, risk assessment consultancy, and auditing to various standards, among other services. We've successfully provided a range of OSH services to over 25 companies in a range of industries since our incorporation. It is our vision to not only raise health and safety standards, but to also drive higher levels of competency in the HSE field. We shall provide not just training in the HSE field, but to also offer opportunities to the local workforce to gain practical experience. As Managing Director, I have over 12 years experience in the health and safety field, and as mentioned, I'm an independent assessor for the Trinidad and Tobago Energy Chamber's Safe to Work program. Diverse HSE Solutions is also the local agent for Process Safety and Reliability Group. They are a premier service provider for process safety training, consultancy opportunities, process engineering, among other services. They have done services in over 700 companies, over 70 countries. Setting up for today's presentation, the theme of the conference really resounded with me. So the theme is initiation of a transformative industry. This beautiful country is faced with multiple paths ahead that it can take to achieve its vision and goals as the industry develops. The government of today is faced with the daunting task of choosing which path balances and manages the expectations of all stakeholders and ensure sustainable development. So included in this is the need to ensure that occupational health and safety not only progresses with industrial development, but also to ensure that occupational health and safety is used as a means of ensuring that this development does not compromise the worker's right to inherent right to work in a safe environment. Globally, occupational health and safety has grown leaps and bounds over the last 4 decades. One of the reasons is due to lessons learned from failures of fatal incidents in industry. Incidents such as the Deepwater Horizon and Piper Alpha come to mind. So we must pay these lessons learned its due respect. So, in looking at the theme of this conference, what I decided to present on is setting a roadmap for occupational health and safety as Guyana hydrocarbon industry transforms. So where do we start? Mr. Terry Steers Gonzalez, Deputy Chief of Missions at the United States Embassy, noted in a December presentation, the Guyanese people have shown a keen understanding of the need for preparation and education at the embryonic stage of development. I was able to witness this firsthand as I had a lengthy conversation with my taxi driver on the way from the airport to the hotel. He was an intelligent man. He showed that he was abreast of all the information regarding the latest oil finds in Guyana, and he also showed a grounded understanding of what he believes the government needs to do moving forward. In setting a roadmap, one of the first steps required is to ensure that there is a rigid foundation that can be built on. And before I go further into the presentation, I do have a brief disclaimer. This presentation is for discussion and information only. Reference will be made in the presentation to the Energy Chamber's STOW minimum requirements. And for those of you who are not familiar, this is an integrated occupational health, safety, and environmental management system standard published by the Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago. And later on in the presentation, I'll go a little bit, provide a little more detail. All reference to STOW in this presentation is purely from my experience as a STOW independent assessor and consultant, and not as an official representative of the Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago. So, rigid framework for the foundation of occupational health and safety. What's really needed? So, in a simplistic model, this framework should include a strong and consistent health and safety legislation and wide-ranging standards, rigid and consistent enforcement, and competence throughout all aspects of the industry. These elements should be risk-based to guide an environment of effective risk management and incident prevention. The intent of this consultation is to identify opportunities for improvement in the Act in order to strengthen it in anticipation of the growth within this industry. And this will help identify issues with respect to conformance, enforcement, as well as areas where greater clarification and support may be needed. And I'm drawing reference to Trinidad. In Trinidad, we've had an Occupational Health and Safety Act in existence since 2004. The current government has started consulting with the public on amendments to this legislation. And I can tell you the response from the public has been significant, and there are aspects of the Act that requires amendment due to enforcement issues. So seeing that Guyana has a similar situation, having an Act that has been in existence for quite some time, we are recommending that there be consultation in amendment of this Act. Similar to Trinidad, Guyana has not published any occupational health and safety regulations to support this Occupational Health and Safety Act 1997. And regulations are critical in having a strong legislative framework, but also in creating an environment for enforcement of occupational health and safety. It is anticipated that the Labour Occupational Health and Safety Department, which is a branch of the Ministry of Labour in Guyana responsible for enforcement of occupational health and safety, and the National Advisory Council on Occupational Health and Safety, will revise its work plan to identify and prioritize the development of occupational health and safety regulations required to strengthen the legislative framework. In addition to legislation, occupational health and safety and technical standards will also be required as the industry progresses. Guyana's Bureau of Standards has been in operation since 1984. They have developed and adopted a number of standards to date, for example, standards regarding road tank wagons, among others. And at this stage, again, it's expected that Guyana's Bureau of Standards will revise its work plan to incorporate the adoption or development of occupational health and safety and technical standards to keep abreast of the developments being made in industry, as well as the revision of the work plan is needed to manage the pace of generation of these standards in a reasonably short time frame. Drawing again reference to Trinidad, our Bureau of Standards has not been as proactive in implementing occupational health and safety standards and technical standards to support industry needs. There should also be an alignment of the work plans of the Labour, Occupational Health and Safety Department and Bureau of Standards. Basically, what I'm suggesting is that if your Labour, Occupational Health and Safety Department is generating a regulation on a particular topic, for example, signage, your Bureau of Standards should be putting forward standards to also, along the topic of standards to provide support. A lot can be said when it comes to enforcement now. With a comprehensive legislation and regulation framework, one might think that enforcement will be simple. But in reality, this is not so. We need to strengthen our enforcement agencies to allow them to do their job of enforcing the legislation. The Labour Occupational Health and Safety Department is tasked with enforcing the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and to be effective, they must have a clear strategic direction. And this direction should be able to withstand the ebb and flow of changing political agendas. They must have adequate and competent staffing to be able to recognize issues and non-conformities within the industry, and to have sufficient staff to establish an active presence. Frequent inspections is also needed to ensure that your legislation is being complied with, and timely investigation of matters are some of the things that needs to be done by the enforcement agency, among others. Competency, and the fourth part of your foundation, is a recurring theme in all aspects of the industry. In order to create a safe workplace, competence of your workforce, including contractors, is needed. Competence in your standards developers, competence of your enforcing officers, and competence of your trainers, coaches, etc. are all required. Now, when we say competence, a lot of people may automatically think training and experience, but competence is a bigger topic. It's broader than that. Competence is a combination of your skills, your capabilities, your ability to do the job. And we need to ensure that we have the competent person to do the job, regardless of what aspect of their portfolio in industry. Effort must be made to provide opportunities to the Guyanese population to expand their knowledge base and attain practical opportunities in the application of this information. So we don't just need to have training, but they need to understand how to apply it. Further to this, the persons involved in standards development for the industry must be competent and should be experienced in industry as well. And the same applies with the persons tasked with enforcing the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Hazards, there are common themes when it comes to hazards, but there are also hazards that are specific based on the industry that you operate. Our enforcement agency and enforcing officers need to understand what they should be looking for when they go into a particular industry. In June 2008, members of the Labour Occupational Health and Safety Department participated in a 5-day attachment to the Trinidad and Tobago OSH agency. And the purpose of this mission was to train new staff within the Labour Occupational Health and Safety Department, as well as to practice practical application of the training received. So this is a perfect example of what can be done in the near future to improve knowledge and understanding of applying occupational health and safety within the hydrocarbon industry. It is strongly recommended that training on other areas such as process safety, varying quantitative risk assessment methodologies, understanding of the hydrocarbon extraction process, incident investigation for process or chemical incidents, etc., also be part of the developmental plan for your enforcement officers. In building on this foundation, OSH management system standards are a good tool to use to guide us. There are various occupational health and safety management system standards available. The more popular ones are the OSAS 18001, which will soon be replaced with the ISO 14001 standard, which is a general occupational health and safety standard. ILO Occupational Health and Safety 2001, Guidelines on Occupational Health and Safety Management System, BS 8800, and OSHA's Regulation and Standard for Process Safety. So I want to focus a little bit more on process safety standard. There are 14 elements to process safety, and is specifically targeted for process environments and highly hazardous substances inclusive of hydrocarbons. So of these elements, there are several that we can use at the developmental stage of design and application. So we want to focus specifically on the process hazard analysis elements, specifically facility siting and HAZOPs. And again, for explanation of acronyms, HAZOP is a hazard operability study. OSHA's interpretation of facility siting includes the spatial relationship between the hazards of a process and the location of people in the facility, particularly occupied buildings such as control rooms. So this, therefore, means that we need to have consideration of the standards for facility design and facility siting at the design stages before any plans are approved, before we have any actual construction. HAZOP, Hazard Operability Study, is a tool for hazard and risk analysis and is used during the design stages of a new process or project, for major process modifications, and for periodic review of existing operations. So again, at the design stages, we can include a HAZOP to ensure that we don't have a structure that's been built and then realize that we have design flaws. And again, there are lessons learned from Trinidad. I've worked on a project where we had a fuel distribution facility and that's been built and established, and then after we decided to do a HAZOP and realized that there were flaws in siting of the facility. So other elements of process safety management important at this stage includes emergency preparedness and response. Now technically, the emergency preparedness and response element of PSM applies to within a company, but we can also use this as a guideline to set up a national framework for spill response and contingency planning, including response agencies, and I would like to say including competent and equipped response agencies. Mechanical integrity is another element, and this element requires companies to define equipment standards